say, can you see? Oh, Canada, we stand on God's holy.
I think we're on live right now. Okay. We may be having trouble posting. Okay. Okay. We're just going to give it a few more seconds. Okay. I think we are live. Are you ready, Ricardo?
I am.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of Buying Property in Mexico with my charming co-host, Ricardo Borges. My name is Loretta Cernowski. I'm a realtor with Remax Costa del Mar in Puerto Penasco, Mexico. And Ricardo, you're my co-host. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very excited to be doing this with you and in front of everybody now. I'm an attorney licensed in Mexico, been practicing law for about 25 years now, mainly within the real estate industry. Being here in Puerto Peñasco for about 18 years now. So, been trying to assist and help the industry, whether it's the real estate agents, developers, individuals, always handy for everybody.
So you and I have worked together for a number of years, and the one reason that I not only became close friends with you and your family, but I also have admiration and respect for you because you're a leader in the community. And I know when I was first taking my diplomato, which is the equivalent of a real estate license, you taught a lot of the classes. So
Thank you all the way around.
Can you explain to people that don't know, because you act as a closing coordinator when it comes to a real estate transaction, what exactly is your role?
Yeah, when my office is hired to coordinate the transaction, basically the agent that comes to my office is looking for his client to formalize either a bank trust for the first time or an assignment or cession of trust rights when we're talking about a bank trust that has been already incorporated in the past. So what we do is we coordinate the transaction with both sides of the equation. We get all the paperwork from buyer, from seller. We pretty much guide the transaction through the legal channels and make sure that ultimately the buyer gets the bank trust handy and duly recorded in the public registry.
That sounds good. I just want to do a quick shout out because we have Mike McCarron, who's a very good friend that I used to work with. He is tuning in all the way from Eastern Canada. And we also have Julie, who I used to work with. Julie, I don't know where you are these days. She's in California. She's a realtor in California. Julie, we have lots of people coming your way. So one of these days, you and I should talk. Okay, so today we're going to talk about bank trusts. So when people say, how do I, what do I need to do buy property in Mexico? What is the definition of a bank trust?
A bank trust is a contract, basically.
Okay.
It's a document that is signed by a number of people with the intention of a given entity or individual to transfer ownership of a given property to a trust, and also at the same time allow a beneficiary to enjoy the benefits of that bank trust. It could be seen as of now something similar to a purchase agreement because there is a person that is actually transferring ownership to another. But in this particular case, there's a third player, key element player, which is a bank that is going to actually hold property on within the lifespan of this bank trust, and basically by doing that, legal certainty is spread out all the way.
So when you talk about the bank, and I know this, but I just want everyone to like, these are the questions that I get. Where is this bank? Who are the banks?
Okay, I am talking definitely about national banks in Mexico. Okay, banks such as Banorte, BBVA, Banco Autofin, and most recently, I've been advised on the fact that there is a small bank very eager to participate in the market. Its name is Bancrea,
Mm-hmm.
and you will be hearing from it quite rapidly and a lot. It's not as huge as other banks, and therefore we would expect, because of that there's lots of more room and of flexibility as well as efficiency, not too much bureaucracy going through.
Okay. So let's say that I'm buying property from a Mexican citizen, so they have a deed, which we can talk about afterwards. So I would need a new bank trust. How do I choose the bank trust? How do I choose which bank? Or do I get
Well,
the option to choose?
pretty much that is our job as real estate agents, as attorneys, somehow knowledgeable of the market here. And basically what we need to understand is which banks are offering better rates in terms of the annual fees assessed to our clients yearly, and most importantly, how customer oriented these banks are. We've seen during large period of time that there are banks, huge banks, offering those services, but our clients become just a number. They're
Sure.
never contacted, and that, of course, puts lots of frustration and negative impact or negative experience to our clients. So I believe, quite frankly, that this new bank is, looking precisely to, turn that negative experience and provide better services at a lower cost, perhaps, and but definitely efficiently.
So that's um, banks being slow or whatever it costs. That's a universal topic, I guess.
Yeah, I
It's
think
kind of like
you could
cell
say that
phones,
again.
cell phones and cable. Okay, so when you talk about the annual fees renewal, there is a difference in cost between the banks then?
Yes,
Okay.
I don't really know the reason, but it definitely depends on their policies. But you would get to see annual fees coming around $500. The most expensive, 550 perhaps,
Okay.
and going all the way down to perhaps 348, 350.
Okay.
Okay.
So those are the annual fees. What happens if you lapse in paying those?
Well, in fact, it really doesn't happen much for the few first years, but technically the bank could say, look, you owe me this much money. Now that it's way too much, we're going to cancel the bank trust to begin with, and we're going to potentially file a legal process against you to recover that money that is owed to us. And they could definitely look into put a cloud on the patrimony of the trust to make sure they are paid on time. I have not ever seen that happening because typically the amounts accrued are not big enough for the bank to spend money in attorneys and that. But
Of course.
it would will happen that the bank is no longer interested in being the trustee and just turn it over to someone else.
Sort of like like a foreclosure here.
Hmm.
So many people say they're still that you buy property in Mexico, it's a 99-year lease. Can you tell us the history of where that came from and why it's
Uh, that's that,
anymore?
that's definitely a myth. There's no such a thing in Mexico, and there is no lease, and definitely it wouldn't be 99 years. There
Was
is
there
no.
ever
Say it again.
was there ever a 99-year lease?
No,
I don't
no,
know
no,
where
no.
that came from.
Go figure. But
Cancun.
it's clearly a very well known myth in town, perhaps somewhere else. Um, what happens is when you're going to uh, have a bank for the first time, you have to have a permit granted by the Foreign Affairs Office or the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Mexico. This ministry is going to grant that permit to a given bank. As opposed to the United States, only banks and a very other few entities can act as trustees, because in the States, anybody can be trustee, not here. Okay? The reason is that basically the individual or the entity that is transferring ownership of a given property to the trust is actually uh, doing that because the bank is going to become the owner.
Okay.
Okay, formally speaking, uh, there's lots and tons of limitations and penalties for the bank, you know, in order to not put a finger on those properties that they are managing. But it's just that due to a legal fiction that exists in Mexico to go around a constitutional prohibition, we put a Mexican entity as owner of that real estate, okay? And therefore, it is possible for the bank to accept the investment of non-nationals in Mexico. For instance, within the so-called restricted zone in Puerto Peñasco or Rocky Point, it is forbidden for non-nationals to acquire direct ownership of property. So
What
how
does
do,
the restricted zone mean?
okay, it's an area of 50 kilometers from the shores and 100 kilometers from the border, in which nobody but nationals can acquire the direct ownership of land. Okay, and that I will talk about that in a minute. That comes because of the history of how Mexico, was being invaded or taken advantage of in the past. See, for instance, many years ago, people from abroad would come to Mexico and buy a little piece of land on the shores, and then they would go back to their government and claim that piece as U.S. or French or any other country. So Mexico needed to put constitutional lock so that couldn't, be seen as legal. Okay, so that's pretty much the reason. It's historically it doesn't happen any longer, but it's still part of our constitution. So no national is allowed to acquire the direct ownership in that specific zone, but yet the industry of the tourism is precisely within that zone.
Right.
Okay, so we want to have the investors coming in, and how do we manage for them to be legally in this area, precisely through a bank trust, because being a national bank owning the real estate it clearly is consistent with the Constitution because it's a national owning that piece. Okay, yet the investor, whether U.S., Russian, it doesn't matter as long as non-national, uh, is reflected as the beneficiary of that trust. Okay, and nothing is going to happen to the property given that the bank is the owner. The beneficiary is actually the boss because the bank won't move a finger unless it's formally authorized in writing by the beneficiary what to do, whether to sell, whether to place a lien on the property, so on and so forth.
What is a beneficiary?
The beneficiary would be the entity or the individual non-national that is actually benefiting from the rights and obligations of the trust. Okay, so if we transfer the ownership of a given condominium to this bank trust, it's the beneficiary, the entity or the individual that is going to be receiving possession of the condominium if it's rented out, the proceeds of the rent, and so on and so forth. Bank is not going to be benefited at all because of the ownership of the property. The bank is going to assess a yearly fee for the services it's providing, and that's it.
Okay. So
And
I
and
buy a
the,
condo in Rocky Point. I have a bank trust. What happens when I pass away to my condo?
okay, we make sure to put a clause that it's called, excuse me, it is called or known as substitute beneficiary clause. So the main beneficiary, let's say it's Ricardo Borges, the beneficiary of a given trust, and I, in writing, stipulate that in the event of my demise, or even if I became mentally incapacitated, I am appointing my wife or my kids as my substitute beneficiaries, equal shares.
Okay.
So on my passing, the bank is going to honor exactly what I have said in that document. And by means of proving whether I passed away or I became mentally disabled, the bank is going to acknowledge the substitute beneficiaries now as the main beneficiaries. No
So
need
at
of
that point, do
no.
they at that point do they have to amend the trust? Is the term the same? What happens in the process?
Definitely, yes. The trust is a written document, so you have to reflect every change as it goes. Okay, so yeah, if that is the situation, you better go to the trustee and inform as of the passing or the other event, place the elements of proof to the trustee, and then the petition that now you need to be acknowledged as the beneficiary. So the bank is going to send instructions to a Mexican notary public. So another document is produced, and then those new names appear no longer as substitute beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries, the primary beneficiaries. And that document goes to the public registry.
Okay. So that's in the bank trust as far as the substitute beneficiary. So it's clear in Mexico that my son or daughter is going to get the condo. What happens in the United States or Canada if it's not in their will, or how is it communicated, or what happens?
No, what matters in Mexico is that that clause is correctly set up. If you have a will up in Canada or a will up in the States that doesn't mention at all what you have done in Mexico through that clause, it doesn't matter because the trustee is going to always honor and is obliged actually to uh, acknowledge whoever has been appointed as the substitute beneficiary.
Okay.
Okay, even if you do have a will up in the United States that it's actually uh, older than a disposition of that kind in a bankruptcy in Mexico, I'm telling you, it will be superseded what you mentioned in the trust because it would have been your very last will.
Okay.
So it takes down or takes over whatever was said, previously. That's the rule in general.
Okay.
The
So I.
beauty of that, Loretta, is that if the beneficiary appoints substitute beneficiaries at the moment of incorporating the bank trust, there won't be the need of probate process in Mexico. It's automatic. You just go to the bank, and the bank, again, as long as whatever circumstances are proven, the bank is going to go ahead and acknowledge, that
Of course.
the new beneficiaries are the main.
So I find a place that I want to buy in Rocky Point, and it's already under a bank trust. Say it's 20 years or whatever. How do you know if I can assume that trust, assume the current one?
Okay. Remember that we discussed that in order for someone to get a bank trust, a permit is needed.
Mm-hmm.
That permit is going to be granted by the Foreign Affairs Office for 50 years.
That's the
Okay,
term of a new trust.
right. So that permit is described in the trust, and the trust gets to be recorded in the public registry. So part of the due diligence that we attorneys, you agents, and us involved in this industry is we got to go to the public registry and understand the chain of events, the chain of title, and get to the point of actually looking at the permit and see what the conditions of the permit were at the time it was issued. And most importantly, to get to see how long is left in terms of years of that bank trust personally.
Okay.
Particularly, I'm sorry. Okay, so if a permit was issued back in 2000, now we know that it's already 23 years old, so it's 27 years more.
So people have many comments or questions about when I buy a property, should I start an LLC? Should I buy it in my personal family name? How do you know what can you do? What's your decisions? What's your advice?
Uh, it won't matter. Basically, the difference would be the liability. That's actually the reason of those entities. It's a limited liability company. So it would take away from the members of the entity the liability. Uh, any other idea with regards of taxes or any other advantage is also either incorrectly interpreted or wrongly used. We don't want to go through that. That's
Yeah,
the
well, that's a whole other show.
right.
Okay, so one thing I want to talk about, or two things I want to talk about, is if you could show, what a bank trust looks like. I know you have a slide that I will put up
Okay,
here.
that's can you see that?
Yep.
That's actually the front page of a bank trust. It's a formal document that has been authorized by a Mexican notary public. This is not a private agreement, it's a public instrument because, again, it's been authorized by a notary public. This document being authorized by a notary public gets to go to the public registry, and we're going to talk about that later, I think. But that would be one of the benefits of closing with this kind of instruments. But this would be pretty much what you would see out of every notary public in Mexico.
Okay. And how long does it take to get a bank trust?
It will always depend which bank you're using. Again, if we're navigating through waters of a gigantic bank, likely we're going to, spend, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, perhaps more. Uh, but average, I would say 3 months.
And what is the cost? I know there's certain variables, but
It's the hard question to answer always. It depends on a number of variables, whether there are capital gains taxes involved or not, whether there are owed trust fees or not. It depends on every case, but average, I would say between 6,000 all the way to 13, 14, 15,000.
does it
Uh,
depend on the purchase price of the property?
that's definitely a key element player on the cost.
Okay. After the term of my bank trust, the 50-year term is up. What's the cost of renewing my trust?
It will definitely be way lower than the numbers I just popped, but the permit is going to be costing you money. The trustee is going to reassess one-time fee for renewing that bank. So somewhere around perhaps between $45,000 to $6,000.
Okay, we have a question. Are HO fees a variable? If these have not been paid by the previous owner?
Our HOA fees.
So if the I'm assuming that this is in the closing statement. If someone hasn't paid their HOA
I
fees,
see. Yeah, you
you and
see,
I have
that's a
talked
very
about
good question.
depends on the HOA, right?
The HOA fees are actually attached to the property, not to the owner. So the intention of that is that if the owner walks away from the property, still those HOA fees are to be paid by whoever gets in the picture. So if some fees have not been paid by the previous owner, you as the new owner are going to be ultimately negotiating that with your manager or administrator of the HOA.
So is that part of your role then? Does that come up unpaid HOA fees in the settlement statement?
It's part of the settlement statement, definitely, as we intend always to put on the picture a number of dollars that both buyer and seller are going to be spending on the transaction, with the intention that we don't go back to them asking for more money. So yeah, definitely the HOAs are part of the due diligence that we prepare, because we don't like any surprise to the buyer.
And what if is it different in different HOAs? Like for
Yes,
instance, Los Conchas versus Las Palomas.
without a doubt. Yes, every resort would have different expenses. Of course, if a resort is bigger than the other one, the expenses are going to be higher, without a doubt.
Okay. Okay, so let's now talk about in an offer to purchase. Let's see if I can. Do we have? Oh, she doesn't have that one. We want to talk about the third page declarations. For the trust.
Yeah, that's a template that has been authorized by AMPI, the Association for the Professionals of the Real Estate Industry in Puerto Peñasco, and Mexico, actually wide. and that document pretty much in-houses the terms and conditions that the offerer is putting in front of the person, or the person that being offered to be bought the property from. And in that page, you can tell whether you're offering to close with a bank trust handy, or depending on what the circumstances are, you're also um, allowed to cross the option of closing not with a bank trust handy, but a private agreement. Both, of course, are legal options. And although I always say this, although it's ideal to close with bank trust at hand, the private agreements are always a tool for whatever number of reasons you can think of. Um, Someone, for instance, that is in an urgency to get something solved, and can't wait, for 3 months to an office to produce a bank trust. Well, you can produce a bridge agreement in private, and then when the other document is ready, you just go ahead and sign it. So
Okay. We have a question. If you buy a house for 600,000, what would the bank trust cost and how many times can a trust be renewed?
again, the answer to that question is hard for me to just say. Number one, because you're going to stick to my answer, and I have not seen any of the particulars of the transaction. It would certainly be close to the $15,000. Please don't stick to the number. Again, many variables may be around that. Okay. Uh, I'd be happy to run the numbers for you if you are interested in understanding that at a more detailed level. I assume our information is somewhere there. If not, agent, if you can just make sure that Mr. Moody gets the information, please do that. And the bank trust can be renewed any number of times. There is no limit.
Okay. So on the real estate side, people, there is special contingencies and terms. And what I always put in the offer is that the sellers to deliver all pertinent documents related to this transaction within 5 days. So that would include the bank trust to the closing coordinator so that Ricardo has a chance to look over the trust and understand what he's dealing with, if there's any complications and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. It's very important for us attorneys, for you agents, and for everybody in the mix to perform a due diligence. That certainly will save you a huge headache, a horror story. It'll definitely be worthwhile just trying. It's a must. You have to have a due diligence.
Now, I do see people every once in a while, because they're so used to the states, saying, owner, I just want to go directly to the owner, because they're saving your fees and my fees. And it's not quite the same as buying property in the States. So, what's your comment on, people say things like, my property got taken away from me, I moved into my place, I didn't have a bank trust, or it never was delivered to me?
I will try to answer that question with more common sense that an attorney answer.
Okay.
If I was investing in Canada or in the States, I would, even if I am an attorney, I would hire a real estate agent, and I would definitely hire an attorney to guide me through the waters of that process that I know nothing of.
Of course, it's a
Okay.
different thing.
Especially in town, and that's one of the reasons we have heard so many horror stories. because people wanting to save a little money end up losing a lot of money because either they were told lies or they weren't um, they weren't guided thoroughly or uh, decently through the process.
Of
there's
course.
there's people like anywhere else always looking to take advantage of others. So yeah, getting the advice of a reputed attorney, a reputed real estate is key element, not only in Puerto Peñasco, everywhere.
What about the statement? I'm not buying property in Mexico because the government can take my house away.
That is totally wrong interpreted. There have been situations in which people have lost their properties, and it's not necessarily because the Mexican government is looking for that to happen and see who is uh, at a specific circumstance to go ahead and attack. You know, if the buyer didn't follow proper procedures at a given transaction, as a consequence, that person may lose the investment. But it's not because the government wants that to happen for that to happen. I can bring as an example, ejido land, which is very common in Mexico. It's ejido land, also known as agrarian land. It's a social land that becomes to a group of people. It's very complex. It's a transaction in which you have to definitely hire a specialized attorney that understands how that works. So ultimately, a bank trust or a fee simple or whatever is obtained. Ejido and agrarian land of sales are part of those horror stories.
Okay.
But then again, it's not because Mexico wants the investors to be scared and watched away. All the way around, one of the reasons this Mexican bank trust was created was precisely to bring people in. And I remember well, somewhere around 2012, 2014, somewhere there was actually a bill that was brought to the House in Mexico with the intention to finally remove that prohibition from the Constitution and allow any foreigner to, acquire the direct ownership of land within the so-called restricted zone. In fact, the restricted zone term would just go away. It got to be passed at the House level, but when it got all the way up to the Senate, it wasn't. So here we are.
Here we are. Well, we went a few minutes over, and I think we're out of comments and questions. Thank you, Ricardo, for answering everything so detailed as normal. So next week, we have another informative session, and Ricardo and I are inviting Yenny. She's an immigration consultant from Sun Valley, and we're going to be talking about residency cards and what you need to know.
Yeah, don't
So
miss that one.
yeah, it's going to be great. Same time next Thursday at 5. That works for you, Ricardo, I hope.
Absolutely.
And if anyone would like a recording of this presentation, please just message us and we'll be happy to send it out to you. Just shoot us your email. Thanks again, and everyone have a fantastic day.
Bye bye.
Thank you.